thought I'd elaborate on what something Bob Stewart said, and that is about the unscripted nature of sport. And I think it's Noel Coward, the great playwright, I think his description of sport was unscripted drama. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, I agree with Bob Stewart, in regards to the fact that with match and spot fixing is the fact that you're getting away from something which is unscripted, it's being planned. And I think that really does go to the integrity of the games. First of all, before starting this, just start off with a couple of definitions, because we talk about match fixing and spot fixing, and I think it's good to have those definitions because they are quite different. So match fixing, that can be defined as the use of means to achieve a predetermined outcome to a sporting context, while spot fixing is producing a predetermined outcome to a specific part of a sporting context. And that's, for example, is the no balls, which I'll look at in regards to Pakistan. It's interesting that Bob also sort of raised Henry Cronje, because that's actually where I've started my material as well, because I think it's not only that, because it's around about 2000 that it started to come out that there was this problem in cricket. It wasn't just Henry Cronje, there was a few others at the time. Salim Malik, who'd been the captain of Pakistan, was banned for life, and Mohammad Assaruddin from India as well were other ones, and it all came out around about this particular time. It's been a bit quiet, but now it sort of really has come back in the limelight in the last few years. So just sort of that's a bit of a background. Just be aware too that the ICC, the International Cricket Council, has set up an anti-corruption code, all right, to try and combat with that, and I'll talk about something of that as well. And it's also set up an anti-corruption and security unit. So it's an integrity unit that he had set up and to look at these sort of areas, because they at least recognise there is actually a problem. One of the interesting things, just before I leave Henry Cronje, was the fact that he actually acknowledged that the fixes didn't actually work. All right, and it's one of the interesting things going through this material is that it struck me reading the material that, hang on, quite a few times it just didn't work. One of the problems Henry Cronje had in one match is he got Herschel Gibbs and Henry Williams on board as well, and they agreed to underperform. But Herschel Gibbs batted very well, and he apparently got out there and said, well, actually it was a good wicket. I was feeling good, and he felt too good an opportunity. So, yeah, Henry Cronje's plans went downhill from there. All right, so that Henry Cronje, as we mentioned, took a life ban, and Williams and Gibbs got 6 months. So it may be seen these days as being a little bit lenient, but at the same token, they didn't actually do anything in the end. They actually performed quite well. But what is the recent ones, which is of interest to us, I think because of the fact that it is New Zealand, but also the fact that it is, as I said, more recent, has been Lou Vincent. Lou Vincent was actually raised in Australia, but he had parents who were New Zealanders, and he went back to New Zealand and played 23 Test matches there and about 100 one-day matches. He had a reasonable career. He's only one of 11 New Zealanders to score a double Test 100, for instance, but his overall career would be modest, probably at the international level. But it's still an achievement to actually play that number of games anyway. It was after he was also played county cricket, and there was problems there with the fixing in the county cricket games. All right, but most of the fixing allegations come from after he finished his international career. Right, so he actually finished his career without anybody knowing about it. But then he actually went to the New Zealand Cricket Players Association and actually confessed to what had actually happened. And then the details started to come out. All right. So there'd been situations when he was playing for Lancashire in the English county cricket that he received, and then also Sussex. And it was while he was playing for Sussex that he actually acknowledged receiving $70,000 to throw a match. All right, there. So that's one of the reasons he got a life ban from the England and Wales Cricket Board. All right, and also in the 2020 Champions League in South Africa, he was playing for the Auckland side. Again, he's admitted there that there'd been fixes there as well. Here, I identified about 12 matches to the at the anti-corruption unit. All right, of games where there had been spot or match fixing. All right. Interesting is the fact that a lot of his New Zealand teammates were actually suspicious at the time. The fast bowler Ian O'Brien said they were watching some of the ICL games, which is not the Indian Premier League, was the Indian Cricket League, which is now defunct, but that's where he actually played for a while. And they were watching some of the games there, and Ian O'Brien made the comment that he was aware that something wasn't quite right. Okay, it was just the feeling of that there's things going on here which aren't right. Okay. So he's received a life ban, Lou Vincent. Now you may think that somebody who's actually finished cricket, that's not much, but it actually includes things like coaching, and often those sort of areas that actually provide a post-career employment, and so he's actually going to be affected with it, and also the stigma actually involved with it. The New Zealander I think is in far more trouble is actually Chris Cairns, because he's actually up now on perjury charges. So Chris Cairns had a very good, unlike Lou Vincent, had an outstanding Test record and one-day international record as an all-rounder. And he's in a situation, again it goes to what happened in the Indian Cricket League, the ICL, because he was actually sued for defamation, all right, by Lalit Modi, all right, and that's where he had actually accused Chris Cairns of match fixing, all right, and that was actually published. So Chris Cairns took legal action for defamation and actually won that case and received £90,000 in damages plus costs. Now the problem is there that Lou Vincent's evidence actually points the finger at Chris Cairns as being involved as well. So that's why he's now been charged with perjury. All right, so it's a situation where it's gone outside of cricket's hand and he's now been charged with a criminal action of perjury. And if those of you might be aware of Marion Jones, that she was jailed for 6 months, again for perjury, because she denied ever taking performance-enhancing drugs, and she did that before a grand jury, which in the United States has the authority of a court, and so therefore it was became perjury. What I've read is that a lot of the New Zealand players are going to give evidence against him, including the present captain, Brendan McCullum, and there's quite a few others as well. So the evidence against him seems to be quite strong from what I can gather. That trial will be in October this year, so stay tuned to probably the words there. The biggest instance have probably involved Pakistan players, and there was 3 of them: Salman Butt, Mohammad Asif, and Mohammad Amir. Now, what actually happened here was during the tour of England in 2010, and a journalist from the News of the World, which is now, you're probably aware, is now defunct, by the name of Mazhar Mahmood, he approached a known fixer by the name of Mazhar Majid, and eventually paid him about £150,000, all right, in order to get, in return for organising that no balls would be bowled on certain balls in certain overs of the Lord's Test. Okay, that was actually carried out. Okay, and it's you actually see footage, particularly Amir's no ball. It misses by about that much. All right. In fact, the umpires consulted each other at the end of the over. Again, it was on the sense that something isn't quite right here. They didn't think anything to do with fixing, because apparently sometimes fast bowlers deliberately do that so they can get closer to the batsman to intimidate them. So that's why the note was taken. But it was interesting that there was a mental note made and comment made to each of the umpires about what they'd actually seen. Now, Amir's ones were a lot closer to the line. In other words, they're only a few inches over. But Amir's in particular was very blatant, a no ball. They're actually charged with criminal charges, Prevention of Corruption Act and also the Gambling Act in the UK, and they received jail sentences from that. Okay. Some people may say that they shouldn't have gone to jail, and certainly if you read around the material, there's differing views on that. Rashid Latif, who's a former Pakistan captain, he felt that the sentences were just. Former English captain Michael Atherton has spoken up against them, particularly in regards to Amir, because he was only 18 at the time. But as well as that, they also had to face an ICC tribunal, and that was this in relation to breaches of the anti-corruption code. Now, the main 3 things to point out about the code in regards to these charges is the fact that Clause 2.11, that is the actual match fixing and spot fixing, all right, where you're deliberately doing things like that and receiving money for it. There's 2.24 has been put in there, 2.23, and that's for odd events like walking on after tea with a pair of sunglasses on or wearing a short sleeve jumper. Believe it or not, people are prepared to bet on that. So even though that's going to have no impact on the game, it's still, even that has something against the integrity of the match. What I really like too is clause 2.24, and that is the fact that there's an onus now on the players to disclose the fact they've even been approached. All right, and I think that's an excellent one to have there. So if you are approached by a match fixer and you just ignore it and don't say anything to anybody, you're actually in breach of the code. And I think that's an important one there, that to make sure that everything's out in the open. I'd also suggest it's in the player's best interest to disclose it as well, like a lot of those situations. So they were all found guilty under the of the ICC tribunal in regards to 2.11. Now, been an earlier test than Lord's, which had been at the Oval, and that's where Salman Butt had actually said that he would bat out a maiden over, the first over he received, because he was the opening batsman. And apparently the signal had been set up that he'd go down the wicket and just prod the wicket a little bit. That's perhaps when I could have used the cricket bat, could have gone down and showed what he did. Was supposed to do. That was supposed to be the sign. But it was a situation that once he got out there, he realised that he saw the field around him and realised there's gaps everywhere. There's a hard ball which could go anywhere off my bat, and he just didn't give the signal because he felt that he couldn't actually play out the maiden over. So that was one that was abandoned because he felt he couldn't actually do it. All right. So the thing was, he was still guilty, wasn't he, of 2.24. All right, because of the fact that he had not disclosed the fact he'd been approached to actually do something. So that's a good example of a situation where it's going to be covered by that particular clause. They then, Amir accepted his the ban. So he was banned for 5 years by the ICC tribunal, and he accepted that ban, and that's going to finish this year. He's back actually playing domestic cricket, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in more detail a little bit later. Salman Butt received a 10-year ban, 5 years of which was suspended. Asif got 7 years, and 5 of those were suspended as well. So they both appealed to CAS, Court of Arbitration for Sport. Now, Salman Butt did it purely on the sanction. He accepted liability. It was pretty hard for him not to because there was such strong evidence against him. So he was claiming that the penalty was too harsh and inappropriate for what he'd actually done. But this didn't succeed very well in the Court of Arbitration for Sport because they actually really said that actually it's very lenient. If you look at other cases, and they referred to other cases, there's been a lot of life bans for people who've done not dissimilar things. So rather than saying that it was too harsh, they actually went the other way and said it was too lenient, although they obviously couldn't increase it. Now, Asif, he argued the fact that the tribunal had heard it, didn't understand the term beyond reasonable doubt, because that's what they'd used, and didn't know anything about cricket. Those two arguments didn't work either before CAS because they pointed out that there were prominent jurists on the tribunal, and they had little doubt that they would understand the term beyond reasonable doubt, and they certainly had enough knowledge of cricket. One of his other arguments too was the fact that he claimed that it was just circumstantial evidence that was being used to show him, and that he did not deliberately no ball, but they actually didn't accept that either, and they pointed out the fact that he had a very methodical run-up, and the fact that no other no balls were bowled by him during the match, so it was just these ones that he did. So they didn't feel there was some bowlers they acknowledge are a little bit more problematic with their run-ups and don't have the same rhythm, and they're more prone to bowling no balls, but not Asif. I've mentioned the fact that they said the ICC tribunal used the term beyond reasonable doubt, which is a little bit unusual in sport because usually most areas it's used what's known as comfortable satisfaction. I don't know if some of you have heard that term. That is used in Court of Arbitration for Sport actually uses that, and it's actually defined. I know there's a lot of other sports have it defined as that's the standard proof will be comfortable satisfaction, and it's always defined as being more than balance of probabilities but less than beyond reasonable doubt. I've seen it used before in the Lance. If anybody's read the Lance Armstrong transcripts from or report from USADA, they continually use the term beyond reasonable doubt. And again, I think that was just to emphasise just how strong they felt the case was. And it looks like the IC Tribunal has done the same thing here, that they've actually used the criminal standard of proof just to really emphasise that they're beyond reasonable doubt that they felt this actually happened. Now this led to, so that's the outcome, so they banned, and the thing that then happened was the ICC made investigations to other matches, because Australia actually toured England to play Pakistan in that same year, and there were suspicions there about some matches, but nothing was actually proven. And the Australian players, Simon Kadich has been quoted as saying they were unaware of anything going on there. What was also investigated was the test match at the SCG in the January of 2010, and for research purposes I was actually at that ground. I was there on the last day, and I can remember ringing up my friend and saying, look, this may only last about half an hour, but just going to town afterwards if it goes out and finishes in half an hour. Australia was 10-1 at the start of play. From memory, they were 8 wickets down. Michael Hussey was still in and Peter Siddle was in, and I think they're still a few runs behind Pakistan. The wicketkeeper, Karman Akmal, dropped Hussey, I think it was 3 or 4 times. All right. That didn't raise my concerns that much because I've been watching the stands, you didn't really see it as much, but looking at the replays, one of them particularly almost seems to push it away from my observation. But it was a situation that when they started, Australia got about a lead of about 136, I think it was, something around there. Pakistan started off well, and when I started to I feel a bit uncomfortable would be the word, or in O'Brien's good words, something doesn't feel quite right, is when both openers hold out to mid-on, when they've been batting well, just keeping along the field. By this stage, the members, I'm actually a member of the SCG, and by this stage the members was absolutely packed because everybody had obviously brought their cards to work and taken an early mark to come down to the ground. So it's a tremendous atmosphere there, but I can still remember sitting there going, I don't feel 100% comfortable with what's going on there. So this game was actually investigated, which I think it needed to be. The ICC came to the conclusion that Pakistan had a dysfunctional dressing room at the time. There was a lot of problems there, and they put it down to there, which I think is a fair enough conclusion. I can't say for certain that it was a set-up match. It has been documented that a number of Pakistan players bought new houses when they got back to Pakistan. Although thinking that through, these are young players. This could have been the first time they got a decent amount of money, and I can actually see that being a natural thing that they would perhaps be doing after this. I think you've also got to keep in mind that Australia's been involved in 2 tests that I can remember, very similar in nature. One was the Headingley Test back in 1981. England were 8 in the second innings, 8 for the equivalent of -60, and then Ian Botham got that terrific 100. England got about 140 odd in front and then bowled out Australia. England were actually 500-1 with the bookies, and it's actually come out later that Dennis Lilly and Rod Marsh and a few other players actually put some money on England. So in today's climate that would be obviously seriously looked at, but they did it completely as a joke because they couldn't believe that the odds were 500-1. Similar thing happened too at the SCG against South Africa. South Africa again were 8 wickets down, still behind Australia. Then the last couple of wickets, partnerships got up to a lead of about 125, I think it was, and bowled Australia out for about 110. So these sort of games do actually happen. So it's hard to look at that test and say this has never happened before, because it has. But as I said, I still have a few suspicions over it. All right, so make some sort of discussion type comments. First of all, I think that the ICC is doing a good job. I don't always agree with what the ICC does. Reducing the World Cup from 14 down to 10 doesn't seem to make sense to me at the moment, but that's another issue, another paper sometime perhaps. But I think having the anti-corruption code, and as I said, I really like the clauses they've put in there, and actually having the anti-corruption and security unit is a good one. And also I've noticed some, what I would call, so they're the bigger picture if you like, but also some what might be seen as small risk management strategies, which I totally agree with as well. One of the things you've got to keep in mind with Mohammad Amir was he was 18, playing in his first year of international cricket, and he was getting pressure from his captain, and in some ways he had nowhere to go. And again, I was at the SCG earlier this year for the test match and also for one-day match, and I noticed actually, because the dressing rooms are actually in the members' pavilion, and I actually noticed there's quite prominent signs about that big, quite colourful, big lettering, which had anti-corruption phone number there. And I thought that was a terrific idea, because sometimes you not know what's going on. And someone like Amir, if he'd seen that, he would have had somewhere to actually go. It may not seem much, but I thought that was a very good idea. Also, I've been reading that in regards to this World Cup, the ICC has been cooperating with the Australian and New Zealand governments to share information. So again, that's something which actually helps as a strategy. And they've also banned in-play betting at the actual ground. So anybody who's seen actually making bets on mobile phones and things like that at the grounds will be evicted and will be banned for the rest of the competition. I do have one other idea, and that is the fact that what came out with the Pakistan incidents was the fact how lowly paid they are compared to the rest of the international cricketers. And actually, in the Court of Arbitration for Sport appeal, Salman Bad actually raised that. That was one of the reasons why they were vulnerable. What is perhaps of more concern has been the problem Sri Lanka and West Indies players have recently had with their boards. Sri Lanka players didn't get paid for about 3 or 4 months, I think it was. And West Indies abandoned the tour of India because they had pay disputes with the West Indian Cricket Board. So again, you're sort of wondering if those players would then be more vulnerable to approaches if they're in that situation. And it's just occurred to me that perhaps some of the ICC could look at doing would be using, because they've got a lot of TV revenue now, is creating what would amount to a minimum wage, a guaranteed minimum wage for all players. So therefore, I would suggest that may make some players less vulnerable. It's only an idea, but I think the vulnerability of players is something that needs to actually be looked at as well. Final thing I want to talk about is Amir's return. So his 5-year ban finishes in September this year. He's already been allowed back into domestic cricket in Pakistan. The ICC gave him permission to actually do that. So he could be back playing for Pakistan in September. Again, it's had some mixed reviews on coming back. Some former Pakistan players have suggested no, he should never be allowed to come back. That's it. He should never return. Michael Atherton, again writing a column, his regular comment has sort of gone in and said, look, he's got to take into consideration the fact that his age, the fact he was pressured by his captain, and also the fact that he has shown great remorse and actually cooperated with the ICC. It's the situation is that you've got to keep in mind though that it's no just because he can play doesn't mean he'll be selected. All right, so it may become, because you've got to keep in mind with a team that obviously most of you involved with sport and know that things like team culture and morale are just as important as the skills of the players, and that he may divide a dressing room because some players feel he should never be allowed. So it'd be interested seeing what actually happens. So he'd be allowed to come back in, but even if he performs very well at domestic level, there's no guarantee he'll be selected by Pakistan because, as I said, there's other factors that have to come in. Just one final comment. It's the fact that, I don't know if people know that at the Sydney Cricket Ground, they used to have a cycling track on the inside of the fence back 100 years ago, the early 19th century, and they had regular races there. And they had to abandon them because what actually became obvious was the fact that all the riders, about the same 10 or 12 riders doing it each week, wherever it was on, they're exhibition type races, and they were just organising the results, just to make sure they all got a pay packet every so often. And once that came out, it was abandoned and the cycling track was removed, which is actually better for the ground anyway. But it's a situation, that is one example I know of where the fact that these were being, a race that was supposed to be this unscripted drama was being pre-organised. And it was a situation where once that found out, the public lost faith in what was going on there and didn't support it, and that was the end of that particular event. Okay. So overall, I do think cricket has definitely got a problem. I do agree with Andrew Strauss, former England captain, that he feels that it will never actually be totally eliminated from cricket. But I do think at the same token, the IC is doing things in the big picture of having anti-corruption code and the integrity unit, and I'm also seeing some what I agree with as some small measure risk management strategies which are helping as well.